Yes, sir. And a copy of the BP presentation.
Where's Jason today? He's on vacation, I think. Timeline.
We're waiting until 4 o'clock. We have 2 minutes.
My phone says 4.
That clock can't be trusted.
I'm assuming that Arnie is watching it, so.
Verizon times 4. Straight talk time.
Who?
Straight talk. Straight talk. We also don't need to double dip. If there's a big issue, people like, no, we gotta start this from the beginning. That should be one of the members. No, I need some extra help on this. Every single one. That's just my opinion.
May the July 25th, 2016 meeting of the Danville Utility Commission come to order, please. Now you call the roll. Ms. Baker?
Ms. Kane,
Here.
Mr. Donahue,
Here.
Mr. Larkin,
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin,
Here.
Mr. Nicholas,
Here.
Mr. Shanks,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
and Mr. Turpin.
Here.
Second order of business, I would like to introduce and to welcome to the Utility Commission Ms. Trina McLaughlin, who will be meeting with us for the first time today. Thank you very much for your service. This is a very interesting commission to be on, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'd also like to thank you for your service in participating in the local governmental process by running for city council. It's an important participation that everybody needs to applaud anyone who runs for city council. And we appreciate your service in that regard. And we're happy to have you with us. Next order of business is the election of officers for the new year. And our city attorney.
Alrighty, we have 2 officers that we need to elect today. We need to elect a chairman and a vice chairman. Each one of those officers will serve 1-year term. They will serve through the end of July 2017. So it is a 1-year term. So I will now open the floor for nominations for chairman.
I nominate Philip Smith to the office of chairman.
Mr. Nicholas has nominated Mr. Smith. Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, I will close the nominations and ask that the roll be called. And if your choice for chairman is Mr. Smith, please indicate by saying yes or aye.
Ms. Kane,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Larkin,
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas,
Yes.
Mr. Shanks,
I'm a non-voting member.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Turpin.
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Smith. I will now open the floor for nominations for vice chair. The floor is open, wide open.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Donahue.
Mr. Donahue has been nominated by Mr. Smith. Are there any further nominations? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations. And again, if Mr. Donahue is your preference for vice chair, please indicate by saying aye or yes.
Ms. Kane,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Larkin,
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Turpin.
Congratulations, Mr. Donahue. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitfield. Next order of business is the passage of the meeting minutes from the June 27th meeting.
Move to approve as submitted.
I second.
Mr. Nicholas approves, Ms. Kane seconds. Are there any, does anyone have any discussion about any additions, deletions, or amendments to those minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. We'll now have the review of the utilities financial statements. Ms. Connor.
We are reviewing the May statements today. This puts us 92% into our 2016 fiscal year. We'll start with the wastewater fund on page 9. It reports operating revenue at $8.9 million, which is in line with our budget at 92% and compares favorably to last year with a 3.5% increase. Operating expenses are within budgeted levels at 79% overall. Total operating expenses show a 9% increase from last year, primarily in administrative expenses, which are up due to increased depreciation and bond issue costs. Part of the variance is also due to the timing of the Severn Trent billings being recorded. Last year, May and June's monthly invoices were recorded in June. With revenues coming in at budget and expenses contained under budget, our net income after transfers is reported at $2.5 million, which compares favorably to budget, coming in at 149% of budgeted net income. We'll move to the water fund on page 10. It reports operating revenues slightly ahead of budget at 93% and $7.5 million, which is a 2% decrease compared to last year. Operating expenses of $4.9 million are within budgeted levels at 82% and show a 4% increase from last year. This increase is primarily in transmission and treatment due to the additional chemical supplies purchased this year. Administrative expenses are also up due to increased depreciation expense and bond issue costs. After factoring in our non-operating revenue and expenses, the fund reports net income after transfers of $1.7 million. While this is a decrease of 11% compared to last year, it does reach 154% of budgeted net income. So we'll move to the gas fund on page 11.
Excuse me, could I ask a question about the water fund? It's more of a request than a question. Could you bring us next month the unrestricted fund balance policy for the water fund and what the minimum fund balance would be allowed under whatever the city's policy is?
Yes.
As we look forward to some capital expenditures here in the future.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving to the gas fund on page 11. The revenues in the gas fund through May are trailing the budget due to the milder temperatures this winter. Year-to-date sales and gas purchases are only at 76% and 72% of budget, respectively. Revenues were down 15% or $3.6 million compared to last year due to the decreased consumption in the residential and commercial classes. Each of those were down 19% and 14% respectively. Total operating expenses are also under budget, coming in at $4.2 million or 74% of budgeted expenses, and were comparable to last year and are in line with the sales volume. Net income before transfers is ahead of budget at $3.9 million and 98%, and the gas cost recovery was an over-recovery of $331,000 at May 31st. Move to the electric fund on page 12. It reports operating revenues of $99.6 million, which trails the budget at 87% and reflects a 5.5% decrease from last year. However, when we exclude the PCA recovery line item, operating revenues are actually comparable to last year within a 1% variance. Purchase power costs are in line with sales and also at 87% of budget. Overall consumption was down 1.5% compared to last year to date. For May, it was up 1% compared to last May. Total operating expenses of $14.9 million are at 86% of the budget, which is in line when we compare it to the sales volume, and are up 4% overall from last year. And the increase is primarily due to bond issue costs and additional allocations to the fund. The fund reports net income before transfers of $9.2 million and net income after transfers of $100,000. The large variance from last year in budget is primarily due to the $2 million PCA write-off that occurred in August. Also, last year had more gross profit, which flowed down and impacted our net income. This year's gross profit, while not as high, is still exceeding budget as of May 31st. The power cost recovery was a cumulative under recovery of $10.3 million at May 31st.
A question, in the presentation before, I think they indicated we were still going to meet our budget net income. Is that going to be caught up in June then?
We have not prepared pre-closing June statements at this time, so I'm not sure if it will or not. We're still working on our year-end closing.
I think it is fair to say, though, our profitability this year is really dramatically impacted by the $6 million of positive recovery year-to-date on our PCA.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And without that, we would be looking at an over $6 million loss after transfers as of this month.
Well, as we recover, it actually reduces our operating income.
No, it improves our operating income. So we are definitely not performing well, other than the fact that we've done a good job of recovering our PCA, which is in compliment to the staff in terms of what they've been able to pull together, given the fact that we did not have any rate increase relief until only a couple of months ago. So I think they've done pretty well working with the markets.
Well, we're not doing that well, even allowing the $2 million that
Oh, no.
we used to pay down the PCA, but we were told we're still going to meet budget, even though it's going to be less than last year. So we're still going to meet budget this year, net income.
I won't know that until we finish our year-end close items.
I know we came in off on our power cost per Jason's note on Friday. We were high versus our forecast.
But that really won't affect, it's all covered in the PCA balance.
Right.
It really don't affect the bottom line. Other accounts receivables will go up.
Right.
Okay. Moving on to the telecommunications fund on page 12, or 13, moving to 13. Operating revenue came in at $1.3 million, which trails the budget at 77% and is down 18% from last year. However, this is just due to timing of the recording of those telecommunication revenue billings. I've looked at June, and they are comparable when we get to June for that revenue. Purchase services were running ahead of budget at 105% and show an increase of 18% compared to last year. Administrative expenses are under budget at 72% and $620,000 and are up 8%, again due to increased depreciation expense. The fund reports net income after transfers of $271,000, which represents 79% of the budget. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Do you all track the telecommunications budget by function, by type of business they're in? The
Market.
internet to the home business versus the wholesale rent of the lines to the schools?
I'm actually not sure how they, if we're tracking it that way. Okay. Yes, utilities is, I haven't
So,
looked at it
so
in that
you are looking to Ms. Holly, so Ms. Holly has that information? Okay, good. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
detail. You're welcome. Any other questions? Thank you.
Regarding the fund balances, reserved and unreserved, can we have just a good overview of those next month, all of the fund balances?
Sure, there, how much, do you want more detail than what's already in the balance sheet that we provide? Okay,
Just a little summary of how they've changed for the year.
okay,
So if we could have just a little presentation on how our funds were used, how they were accumulated, or how they were dispensed, I think that would be beneficial. Just to kind of take us through a discussion on each of the fund balances would be beneficial.
okay.
Could I add to that, and I appreciate Mr. Donahue's question. Again, going back to the question I asked earlier about the water fund and the policy, I don't even know if there is a policy. We've only ever really talked about the electric fund and its unrestricted balance and how important it was to that operation.
Yes,
But
there's a
I mean,
policy
but
for
if we,
all.
for all of them. Well, include that in, that's a very good question Mr. Donahue asked.
Yes,
Correct.
Well, I mean, we got a static snapshot, but it would be very beneficial, I think. In particular, we also have a new member of the commission to really kind of talk about the mechanics of how those work and how those cash flows have changed over the year.
okay.
Okay,
Right.
That'll be a good review.
thank you.
Question on, going back to the gas fund, page 11.
Okay.
Did we over budget? I'm having a hard time understanding total operating expenses are within $100,000 of May last year, yet it's only 74%. Are we over budgeting?
I'd have to dig down into it, but a lot of those expenses are gonna be fixed. So some of our expenses are variable depending on the revenue that's coming in and the jobs that we need to do. But a lot of that depreciation, our salaries and wages for our employees, which is the bulk of our expenses, are fixed. So they aren't gonna change, vary from year to year. And the bulk of those costs are fixed costs. Does that answer your question?
I think so. We're not over budgeting. I mean, we're,
Right, I don't think so.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Connor.
It is hard to tell.
Next item is a water plant audit report from EE&T. Barry Dunkley.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Before I introduce the speaker, I just wanted to show you that last year, Environmental Engineering Technology also did a report for us called Assessment of Source of Water Vulnerability, which Nancy McTeague with the firm presented to us, identifying over 1,500 possible contamination sources in the watershed above Danville. I call it a detailed source water assessment. And it went on to, if you can't, the idea there is to remove the contaminants so they don't get into the soil, so you don't have to treat them at your water plant. But if you can't do that, then they delineated those contaminants into groups and define types of treatment that could be used to remove them, and a ballpark cost for those kind of treatments. And as you might imagine, they were all very expensive. We also hired Environmental Engineering Technology, or E&T, to do a water plant evaluation, I call it, and they refer to it as an audit. They also looked at the current regulation and future regulation status and addressed those issues too. And they also, Nancy McTeague again, looked at the staffing issues at the water plant. But Richard Brown and Jerry Wright are here from Environmental Engineering Technology to, Richard's going to do the presentation on the audit that they did at the water plant, and then also bring in a few things about the regulations. And it's also going to mention something about lead service lines. You probably don't want to hear that, but we figure like that this is what we need to get this area in the open. The Flint, Michigan issue has revved around the country, and people are asking questions, and so Richard will also address that too in his presentation. So this time I'll just turn it over to Richard Brown.
Before we turn it over, Barry,
Yes, sir.
you know, I have to admit that kind of haunted me when I read the packet prior to coming. And the reason it haunted me was when I first came on the commission years ago, if you recall, we had a lateral removement program of lead laterals throughout the city that was accelerated because of our concern.
Right.
I mean, the assumption at that point was we did not have distribution pipe that was lead.
We don't, but what the regulations are addressing is the lead service lines on the customer side of the meter. And the
Customer
logic
side.
we've always taken, that's not our problem. Well, the federal entities, EPA, is saying, yes, it is going to be your problem. That's what Richard's going to talk to you a little bit about, but just want to throw it out there on the table because we've always said it's the customer's
But
problem.
just to clarify, this is on the customer side of the meter.
That's correct.
Again, I think we did an excellent job years ago of clearing up our system
Right.
and diverted significant amounts of capital actually to accelerate that.
It was, we took that upon ourselves. The city did that.
Yes, we did.
They were not required to do it.
We weren't.
It was encouraged to do it by EPA and the state, but it was not a requirement.
No.
Flint, Michigan didn't do it. And that's part of our problem among many others, but, so this is bringing it up now from the meter to the customer's house is what this is addressing. And like I said, in Virginia, we've always said that's the customer's responsibility, but, now the EPA is trying to say, no, you've got to figure out how to help that customer.
Well, Barry, who's gonna pay for that? Is the federal government gonna provide the funds, or the other customers gotta pay for other people's services?
What EPA is trying to do is to get the utilities to help the customer. Now, what's that help going to be? It could be the city financing it for them. It could be coordinating financing for them. It could be any number of things. We don't know at this point in time exactly. Now, I don't think it's any federal funding being proposed for this, so it's all on the utilities to coordinate and get this done, and they got to figure out how to finance it.
What is the mechanism that this is coming down? Is this a new rule in the Federal Register from the EPA?
It's something that's being considered. It is not ruled yet. However, the EPA is coming down the pike.
So this would be an EPA rule, not legislation?
Right, EPA rule.
All right, well, it takes about 2 years from drafting to implementation. Has it been proposed?
It has not been proposed.
Has it been
as yet.
drafted?
They're doing the studies on it, and again, the Flint, Michigan issue brought this to the forefront. And I'm not trying to say anything for Flint, Michigan either, but that issue brought it out to the open that no, they're not being addressed in a lot of localities. Many localities did address it from the meter to the main, but not from the meter to the house.
Right, so what I'm trying to get is a timeline. There's nothing in writing that's a draft rule yet.
No.
Okay.
And it could be 3 years before it's done, but the issue is we're trying to prepare for it because it's going to be, as I take it, no funding, but it's going to be mandated. It seems to be that way, put it that way.
Right, it's just difficult to prepare for something that we don't
Right.
know what the regulation is or how it applies.
Well, in this one, it's easy. Replace the line. I mean, it's not, I mean, I don't have to do any
I'm not
engineering
gonna
or
speak for
anything.
the group, but I'm gonna speak for the group in that there's no appetite to spend money
Oh, I agree.
replacing personal people's property on their own property.
And
So,
we also add to that, to make it even worse, of course, we have been in compliance with the lead and copper rule since it was put forth. So we do not have excessive lead levels by the rule. Of course, the rule, if you remember, is you have to meet 0.15 milligrams per liter at the 90th percentile. Well, that means that some could exceed. And on occasions, we have had customers where we collected samples from to exceed the 0.15. And when we did, we advised those customers that their sample exceeded the action level of 0.15. And they should look into, their service line, their plumbing fixtures, or whatever. It's a lot that has to be, in addition to the lead service line, you have the plumbing fixtures that have lead in them too, if they're older houses.
now, that's a EPA rule. Is there a parallel VDEQ rule in the works? Or is this a strictly federal issue?
Well, it came down from the federal, and the health department enforces these rules on the water side of it, and yes, it's in their regulations, yeah.
Okay, so there is a
They just
parallel.
adopted it, they just adopted verbatim.
All right, so whatever the EPA comes down with, DEQ is gonna do it, or the health department, whichever.
The health department's in charge of the drinking water.
They have no choice.
Is
They
the-
act on behalf of the EPA and the state.
Usually, when it comes down from the federal level, the states just.
I'm just
adopt
wondering
it.
where we need to look, and we need to look at the EPA, is what you're saying.
Yeah, EPA, but like you said, it'll probably be, it could be 3 years before this comes down, but it's coming, and the idea here is, let's prepare for it.
Is the EPA gonna make an exception to those water systems that can prove that they have taken care of the main to the meter situation?
I would think so, although again, that's not.
Your man back here shaking his head no.
Yeah.
If you can prove that you don't have lead, the problem is, we do have lead.
No,
We don't
I'm
exceed the
talking
limit.
about from the main to the meter. We're not gonna get any, we're not gonna get any credit for doing our part.
Oh, no.
No, because the regulation's gonna require
Right.
main to the meter anyway, so we're already gonna come in having met it.
Do we know how many, we're gonna have to invest in a survey for every service in Danville to find out?
I think that we probably already have that data that,
Okay.
as alluded to back some number of years ago, in the early 90s was when this came about. The city in the 90s identified all the lead service lines that they could identify, and they replaced them. Like I said, we were proactive and replaced them. So they have we replaced those lead service lines, X number, whatever it is. So now they gotta go back, and did the homeowner do any replacing of the service line on their side of the meter? I doubt if any of them did, to be honest about it.
So
that's
knowing the EPA, what we're gonna start with is, we're gonna have to spend money, and we're gonna have to survey every service in Danville to find out if they've got lead from the meter to their house.
If the rule is proposed the way that it's being represented here, the problem I think that we have is the EPA rulemaking process starts with a draft rule that then opens for public comment.
Sure.
From the time of the draft to the actual putting it into the Federal Register, and then the
Sure.
time you have to comply, that we're getting 3 or 4 years down the line. So
A
we have
lot
to
of
worry-
things can happen,
A lot of
right.
things can happen, and we have to worry about it, but we don't know what to worry about until we see the draft proposal on paper, so we know what it is we're dealing with.
My general outlook toward EPA rules are that they never get better, they only get worse as time goes on. But
No
that's
argument
just
here.
my opinion.
I don't think we'll have to survey every connection in the city. I think we'll start with the services that we replaced, whatever number they are.
Right.
The others at that time had been determined not to be lead. Now, there may be some stragglers somewhere that we can come upon.
And I'm sure you can probably profile the age of the housing and get
You
some
can.
idea from that.
Age of the
You
stock.
can.
You're gonna eliminate whole areas.
You can eliminate, that's correct.
Okay,
Right.
good.
But anyway, any other questions before Richard comes forth? Okay, Richard, turn.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Got that out of the way.
Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Brown.
Sure. Be glad to be here. Let's see. I guess this is it. This is the one from I thought this was already up here.
Isn't it already up there?
It's a different one. Oops. No, there's a more recent one. It should be on here.
So we're gonna be looking at the same thing?
Let's just use this one. So- Apologize for the delay. So this is, thank you for having me here today. We're going to talk about the regulatory and facilities audit for the Danville drinking water plant. This was part of there was a previous audit at the plant in 2001 that we did. This is an update to that. It also addresses some of the issues that were brought up in the EET 2015 study, where we evaluated the coal ash spill and other things like the coal ash spill that are in the watershed that could similarly affect the Danville water plant in the future. So we're going to be talking about the earlier audit and the current 2016 audit. As part of that also, we're going to talk about some of the findings from that we want to focus on in particular. The 2001 audit was completed, and that process included evaluating the physical structure. Is the equipment in good working order? Is it going to last for the next 15, 20, 30, 40 years? We did a regulatory component of this. How will the current facilities be able to handle the current regulations and the new regulations? And because of that evaluation, at that time there was a lot of regulations coming up on microbial and disinfection byproducts, and so there were big changes proposed for the filter media and under drains, and those proposed changes were installed in 2004, as well as some other improvements, refinements in chemical feed, some variable frequency drives that allow the pumps, or in other cases they could allow flocculators to the mixers to be operated at different speeds. There also was some new raw water pumps installed. There were some additional recommendations that were categorized as a priority 2, and those were not installed. So since that time of that 2001 audit, the new equipment, priority 1, was installed. The priority 2 were not, plus the materials, the equipment, the tanks that were okay in 2011 are now 15 years older. There's also the equipment that we installed then is now 10 years older. Another aspect on top of this is that there would have been issues that come up just because of normal operations in 10 or 15 years of additional operations. The Danville water plant, though, has been exposed to 2 unusual stresses very recently. One was the coal ash spill in February 2014, and more recently, the taste and odor events. And you could also categorize that as a third stressful event, because one of the solutions, one of the remedies to the taste and odor was adding a great deal of powdered activated carbon, which creates a lot more material for the clarification processes and the filters to remove. So even though you're removing the taste and odors with the PAC, now you got to remove the PAC and deal with that. In 2015, in the aftermath of the coal ash spill, at this time, it was about the first time, I believe, that all the complete information from the coal ash spill had been collected and compiled. So part of this earlier report was an overall final assessment, if you will, of the February 2014 coal ash spill and its aftermath. But another big component of that report was an identification of other potential contaminant sources in the watershed. This is a graph, a map that was in the previous presentation in 2015, which showed the areas that were mapped in the system. You can see the whole watershed. Up gradient of the water plant is shown, 19,000 square miles, upgrading of the plant intake, and then there's also a zone 1 area within 5 miles of the intake that was where we focused on some of the contaminant sources in there. So the idea was to find out if there were other contaminant sources similar to the coal ash spill, or that might be impacting either because of high solids or because of a high contaminant load, or whether it's a VOC, a volatile organic compound, or whether it was microbial in nature. What are some of the other things that could be happening? And then as a consequence of that, what are some of the things that the city of Danville to be better prepared for that contingency in the future? So not only being able to deal with our daily operations, but being able to deal with contingencies such as this. So the 3 of the items that in particular were mentioned were a new audit to evaluate how the facility is 15 years later. Another thing was to look at mechanical solids collection, which we'll talk about in a little more detail later. And another alternative is riverbank filtration, which is a modification to the intake structure. So the goals, again, were similar to 2001. We're looking at the exact same things. How well are things maintained? Are they still functioning properly? Can they meet up with the current regulations? Can they meet up with the new regulations that are coming down the road that EPA is considering? Also, on top of that, we wanted to add this additional aspect of being able to respond to a spill or storm event that could cause large amounts of solids, large amounts of contaminants to be present at the plant, and can the plant be able to provide additional redundancy, robustness to deal with those types of high contaminant events. So we're going to talk about some of the key recommendations. The full audit is available, including the regulatory audit and a separate facilities audit. We're going to talk a little bit about the capital improvements at the top, the plant overall upgrades, including a mention of the mechanical sludge collectors, and some other programs that we'd like to talk about as well. Asset management plan, assessment of the filters, in particular with their how they relate to the taste and odor events, and the lead service line that Barry mentioned. So the plant upgrades include the mechanical solids collection, and accompanying that needs to be a structural assessment for leaks in the facility, the tanks, the structures that are present there at the facility, as well as the administration building, the roof repairs to help remediate some of those issues. There are some strategies that can be incorporated to reduce the amount of condensation in the filter galleries. Those cause the equipment to rust, and it makes it difficult for electric equipment to be in that environment. So this kind of program is proposed to try to mitigate some of those issues. The PAC system has been installed a temporary system has been installed to deal with the taste and odor issues that you have. This is some modifications to the PAC feed system that will make it more permanent.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Could you, acronyms are sometimes difficult for folks to understand, so if you wouldn't mind, would you, rather than use an acronym, state what the piece of equipment is, please?
Okay, for the PAC?
Please.
Yes.
Yeah, powdered activated carbon. There is that acronym is bad to use too, because there are another chemical that's similar that people use the same acronym. So that's powdered activated carbon. That's activated carbon that, if it's granular in nature, it's called GAC. It's in a packed bed. PAC is powdered activated carbon. It's loose. You add it to the water. It contacts the materials, and then it settles out with all the other particulate material in the water.
Where is this material added in our water system?
You'd like to add it as early as you can so that it gets as much contact time with the contaminant. This is added currently at the intake, so that's the first chance and the longest chance you get it. You also don't want to add it when you add the coagulant, the alum that they use later, because then the alum gets the PAC in a flock and it's no longer in contact with the water. So you want to keep it in contact with the water as much as you can, and then add your coagulant and settle it out and remove it.
So right at our intake at the river water location?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So it's offset, it's done on the treatment plant. Yes?
Are there any concerns in any schools of thought about the extent of powder activated carbon that's being used in our treatment process?
By the amount?
Yes.
It's a large amount, but it's what's needed to deal with the.
Are there any health concerns by any of the camps, any varying camps?
No, but the only health consequences would be positive. They would remove DBP precursors in addition to the taste and odors, so that there's less things to react with the chlorine to form disinfection byproducts that are concerned, like THMs. So as long as you remove the PAC is pretty easy to remove with clarification processes, and then you have a filtering process after that. So it doesn't get out in the system. There really is not many negative consequences that I can think of. The only ones I can think of are positive.
There may be one, Mr. Shanks, that the dust from we currently use a bag feeder. We could not fit a super sack feeder with 2,000 pounds of carbon in at one time. The building wasn't big enough. So what Richard is talking about here is maybe going with a larger bag, if you will, 2,000 pounds if it's to be fed on a continuous basis.
And that would also be at the intake?
Yeah, still be at the intake, we'll use the same building, hopefully. But there is, for the bag feeder, even though we have dust and ventilation and all that, it's tough for the operators. They go in there and they get it all over them. They come out and they have to almost change clothes because they get it all over everywhere. But that's not a health hazard per se, but it is not something that we want to continue to do if we can.
And the PAC system improvements will hopefully help mitigate that.
Just as we're getting into the discussion, Barry, is there a PPE requirement?
Is that what now?
Is there a personal protective equipment and
Yes.
requirement for our operators, and are they using specific equipment
Yeah,
during that
when they go in,
process?
Of course, they try to cover their feet, cover their mouth with the dust, like a dust mask. They usually use the shield, but the stuff is so fine, it gets everywhere. You just can't, unless you have a self-contained breathing apparatus, you can get it. But I mean, again, it's not a health issue, it's just a nuisance as much as anything. And when they go down there and fill it up with bag carbon, they have to lift the bags up and tear them open and pour them in the bin. They come back, they're covered with it. You know, if they wear glasses like I do, the only white place on their face is behind the glasses. But it's not a health hazard, and like Richard said, it comes out, we take it out in the sand basins, and a lot of it comes out in the filters. So it doesn't go in the system. Many people I've gotten calls telling me that this carbon is making me sick. I don't know how many calls I've got like that. I said, look, there's no carbon in the water. We're taking all the carbon out of the water plant. It comes out in the sand basins and the filters. But I've had quite a few calls to that effect.
That was the nature of the question, or I'd gotten some of the similar responses.
Right.
And that's the motivation for the PAC system improvements, is to improve the dust and make it more of a contained process.
Can I ask a further question about these system improvements? That's $500,000 as I'm reading it. Are these are improvements to the current system that we've already implemented? You called it a temporary system. Is the $500,000 going to be used to replace, or is it going to be to improve and to build out, so to speak?
To improve, so it's going to be using as much of the existing process as possible, like the feeder. The feeder is suitable as the method by which you get the PAC into the feeder.
Okay.
That's going to be changed. So it's going to be some modifications of the existing system.
You're going to change the activity, make it continuous, some of those things like that.
Yeah, what they convert to the super sack feed, 1,000, 2,000 pounds, uses the same feeder. It's just the top portion that you made up to it, and the super sack is closed, and you put it in, and then you puncture it, and
It's
you
just
have
a
no
better
dust.
technique.
You have no dust yet.
Okay, but this is not a replacement, this is an improvement.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question
Fred?
about the solids collection equipment. I know that one of those clarifier basins is very irregular in shape, sort of a natural rock formation bottom. Are you going to be able to add an automatic collection system in that clarifier?
Well, Richard probably better to answer this than me, but I'll give it a shot. Richard can add to it. But all of the basins we have, what we refer to as the south basin, is in a J shape. It consists of 3 sections. 2 sections have a rock bottom. The third section, which is the largest, has pretty much a flat bottom with a channel in the center for solids removal equipment of the old type of the scrapers. The other 3 basins of the 4 that we have are rectangular. They slope sides and they sloped ends. To use the equipment that we'd like to use, we're going to have pretty much a flat surface. So we're going to have to fill those basins in. We'll lose some of the volume, but we think that losing the volume, that was the very sloped portions was for solid storage anyway. So now we're going to remove them as they sell out, so we don't need the storage part of the basin. The rock portions pose a little challenge for us because we're going to have to, the rock slopes, if you will. It's not flat rock. Now, you think of it as jagged, it would be easy to do, but no, the rock is sloped in those 2 sections. Even though they're small, they get the heaviest solids load. So we're not quite sure how we're going to fit those in there. We're going to have to do some good design to try to get it to work. But you make
Okay, that's what I thought. It's going to be a real challenge.
It's a big challenge.
It was a very important difficulty that had to be overcome, but this price does include a proposal for how to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to ask a question about the PAC system improvement. You say it's temporary. How long would you have to use that? What's the timeline on that?
Okay, how long to use the powder activated carbon?
Yes.
Well, so far we've used it for continuously since last October. We have not detected any odor in the raw water for some number of months. So we've been tailing off with the carbon. We're down to about 7 milligrams per liter now. At one time we fed as much as 45. We're going to get off of it entirely as long as we don't detect any odor. The problem with that, we got off of it last summer and it came back and caught us again because we didn't catch the odor when it came in, and so we produced water for probably 2 weeks that had odor to it and we didn't catch it. Why didn't we catch it. Well, we couldn't detect it with our noses at the time. And raw water does have some background earthy odor to it, period. It's river water. If you've ever fished in it, you'll know it. It has a little odor to it. But anyway, we didn't. So we usually think of it, we hadn't fed it at all since I've been there for 18 years until last spring. And before my tenure, I understand it was, that nobody can remember when it was used. But there was something that changed in the water quality in the river that created it. We know some of it was algae related. And powdered activated carbon is a good method of treatment for algae too. But we hope we don't have to add it at all, but we're gonna be prepared to add whatever we need to add. But it usually is something you'd add for a couple of weeks in the spring if you have an algal situation, and maybe in the fall when the temperature changes. And sometimes when you get hot, dry weather in the summertime, you may need it. But again, we've never needed it in Danville until last year. Sorry.
That's okay. And right, so these are the recommended capital improvements that we talked about in the audit, and we talked about these so far. Oops, there's a few more. We have variable speed drives for the flocculators. That allows them to be operated, to be adjusted when the temperature changes to keep the same mix intensity, and also to optimize as opposed to being a constant speed, to make them be variable so that they provide the best treatment. You want to have the particles be colliding together, but not have it be so well mixed that it breaks apart the particles. You're trying to get them to build up bigger and bigger so that when they get to set basin, they start settling out. We also have filter valve replacement. Again, there's parts of the plants that were built in 1924. Some of the new parts were built in the 60s, so they're over 50 years old. We have one raw water isolation valve that the stem is broke off, so we're replacing that to make it an isolation valve again. We included, instead of the rest of these are for the construction. They don't include financing, they don't include engineering costs, but they include the construction of these facilities. The design of the chlorination storage feed system is just for the design. It's a hypochlorite system to replace the gas feed system that's currently used. So the hypochlorite is use liquid bleach instead of chlorine gas. It makes it a little bit easier for dealing with having the stuff shipped. You're shipping bleach instead of chlorine gas all over the country in the rail cars and everything, and on the site. Although the system that's on site does pretty well with dealing with the chlorine gas that they have. There's also going to be some improvements in the instrumentation and control, the SCADA, for the process. That partially depends on what kind of processes are installed and what the city of Danville wants to do in terms of controlling them manually versus automatically, and what data is recorded. We also have some of the things that wear out more often and that allow you to properly treat the water is getting the chemical feed under control. So having the chemical feed pumps and storage tanks be kept up to date is an important issue. So these proposed recommended modifications total up to $5.5 million. These are things that we are recommending to be included in the CIP at some point somehow. Now, if this is a problem for budgetary purposes, it might not be possible to do all of these all at once. We are suggesting that these first 5 items, and these are roughly in order of precedence, all the 11 items on the list, that these ones totaling $3.1 million are ones that should be done if the funds are available for that level of funding. We're going to talk a little bit about solids collectors.
Excuse me, can I go back before you change that page?
Yes.
The $1.76 million in filter valve replacements. You said that they haven't been changed out in 50 years. Did you say that?
That's correct. These are in the north and the south parts of the filters, of the treatment plant.
What is their life in a technical way of saying that?
If you're getting 20, 40, 50 years, you're doing good. And they have been maintained and kept operating really well, but how much longer is that going to last?
And you do not consider this an immediate need to change those filters, those valves?
We think all of these items should be replaced, but if it becomes an issue that the 3.1 million is all that can be budgeted at this time, then we recommend that these first 5 items are the ones that be done for that amount. If there's additional amounts, we propose doing all of them at some
If
time.
these valves fail, what will happen?
You will have to keep going with the other valves the other filters that you have, and you will have to come in and repair those.
So this is not going to stop the plant if
one
they
fails.
fail?
If one fails, yes.
So
You
how
isolate
many,
that one filter.
how many are there?
16.
Okay.
8 of the 19.
Okay, so we're not going to shut the
8.
plant down. We have a little wiggle room here because we have some redundancy, if you will.
Right. But again, the
All right.
point is that they've been operated, the whole plant has been operated very well, both by the current people and the people in the past. It's
And we
kept it going for all this time, but it might, well.
I was trying to reconcile the 50 years and the not immediate, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
They're not just 16 valves either, because you have inlet and outlet and backwash valves, so it could be as many as 4 or 5 valves per filter. And you usually think of pipe work lasting 100 years. Physical facilities like the treatment plant, designed for 25-year life. Valves, because you turn them and operate them, they have a much shorter life, sometimes around 20 to 25. Like I say, so many of them are around for many years because they're just not operated. But when you go to do operate them, if they've had damage to them, you'll break the steels.
These
Okay.
gate valves, ball valves,
These are a mixture of valves, but most of them are probably knife gates.
knife gates,
Some of them will be other types of valves, but the majority of them will be knife gates.
pretty good size.
Some of them will be butterfly.
Thanks.
Is there any more comments about this slide? Okay. We've talked a little bit about the solids collectors, and they were talked about in the previous presentation on the 2015 report. Just wanted to reiterate a couple of items. The basins are currently manually cleaned. So one of the issues is that when you go through all this trouble of controlling the chemistry and getting the particles to settle out in the said basin, you've gotten them out of the water, but now they're still there to be potentially resuspended if you get some kind of flow surge or some other problem. And one of the things that could be happening is that the PAC does really good at removing the taste and odors, and the PAC is now sitting at the bottom of the basin, and when it gets saturated, it can start releasing them again. So you haven't gotten rid of the taste and odor source because it's still there in the said basin. So if you have the mechanical collection, it's not a continuous process, and it doesn't mean you'll never have to manually clean them, but it does periodically remove the solids that have been collected and get them out of the system. And then instead of every 2 months, say in certain parts of the system that have to be manually cleaned, you might be cleaning them once every 6 months or once every 12 months by manual. But the point is that they'll be getting these solids out of the system so they can't be resuspended or the contaminants can't be re-released. It also saves the labor it takes to, when you take down everything, to have to clean everything. And again, when you have a high solids event, like the ash spill, it does leave you potentially vulnerable if you're having problems dealing with that large amount and you still have it there. If you can't get it out of there, then that could cause problems if the event continues. The proposed alternative includes the solids collectors themselves and the assessment of the leaking that we talked about. Asset management program, it's more like an asset management process. The program is not necessarily like a computer program. It does include a database, which is a very important part of this asset management program. It's a inventory of all the facilities, all the components within the different parts of the treatment facility. Currently, there is not a controlled, computerized inventory of all the equipment. So this includes all the valves, all the pumps, all the actuators, all the instrumentation in the facility. And this, so part of is to get an inventory of all those components within a different part of the process. So what's in the filters, what's in the clarifiers, what's in the flocculators. Another thing that you do when you're creating this database You have the size, you have the model number, you have when it was last replaced, how often has it been repaired, what's the replacement cost. If you have a valve, for example, or a pump that you say, well, heck, we've been having to break this down, once every month for the past year, or it's worked fine for 20 years, and then in the last 6 months we've had to take it down 3 times. It tells you that this is one that might be more prone to needing more attention with perhaps replacing. On the other hand, you might have an old valve, an old pump that is what you think is well past its useful life, but you show that if you keep maintaining it, it seems to be keeping going okay. So you can know that one is one you might be able to keep going with if you just keep up with the maintenance. The main goal is after you get all the inventory of the facilities, and this could be that all the 4-inch valves, all the 8-inch valves in the filter, as well as any other place in the facility. You can use this tool to develop your future CIP budget, indicate when you're going to need to schedule replacement of things and your maintenance activities. So this could focus on just in the filters, just in the chemical feed, or it could say, we're going to be doing modifications in this part of the facility, and there's a bunch of 8-inch valves here. Well, since we're going to be replacing all these 8-inch valves, let's see how many other 8-inch valves there are, and we'll replace those at the same time we get the quantity discount, if that's what you want to do. So you have that potential if you have this database and you use the process to come up with these plans, the CIP and your maintenance activities. One of the things we found in our filter assessment,
Excuse me. I'm looking through what I've got in terms of paperwork, and I didn't see the AMP outlined as a significant line item. Did I miss it?
It's not listed in the budget. It's not a capital improvements. It's a program. It's a project that we're going to be doing as a study.
Okay, so this would be an engineering study?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have submitted a
So, but that's not included in the budget items that we saw.
No, that's not included in this.
And what's the proposal that you've put together in terms of dollars?
We have it's going to take
order of magnitude.
We have an additional budget to get it set up, to get the parameters, get the extent of it set up, and get the information with help of the utility, and that is $30,000.
So $30,000 is really to actually put together the estimate of what the level of effort is going to be. That's a preliminary engineering dollars?
That's the first phase of the project. Yeah, the next phase will be some additional tweaking of that and
I'm quite familiar with what you're talking about doing. So Barry, are you talking about putting in a total productive maintenance program in your facilities?
What we'll do is with this program, we hope to put the data into the program itself, so we can save that money, and then EE&T or whoever we hire would take that and ideally develop the sheets, if you will, that you have to input the data in. It's an enormous amount of equipment at the water plant that we have, and you then. It's a work in progress because you go to different levels. What do you want to use this for in terms of maintenance? And you can take it to the fact that you can pull it in, it'll spit out what the maintenance maintenance activities that are needed this month. The maintenance activities needed on a quarterly basis. You can take it to the extreme to the next level of, again, all of the detail to the equipment. You break it down into the parts and the equipment. So the $30,000 will not get a complete, what we call asset management program, but it will give us something that we can use. And right now we just have written material down in different places. Is all we have in terms of asset. It's really not an asset management. We just document when we get the equipment, when we put it in, and maybe the manufacturer's rep, and that's all we have. So this will give us all that. Plus, you can actually tie it to the vendors. You can pull up the diagrams of it in terms of the shop drawings on the equipment. You can pull up most anything you want on that particular equipment. If they have other service vendors that they use that you could put in there. So it's any number of things you can put in there to help you manage that equipment and needs to operate and maintain.
But I think we just need to keep in mind, $30,000 is a fraction of the cost to fully utilize an asset management program, which is just the database that you use for putting in a total productive maintenance system. And is your intention strategically to look at doing this in the waste treatment plant as well?
The waste treatment plant has computerized information now that they use a similar type of program, if you will. I asked, this one will probably be much different from what they got.
Why?
Pardon?
Why?
Well, then.
Wouldn't it be nice to have the same database?
Well, they
for both
have,
systems?
and they, I don't know what program they use. They developed their own, as we are, probably using EPA's format. That it makes everything universal. And that's what Richard and them will probably do is put this in it's an Excel spreadsheet as much as anything to start with. That's what you start with. And then it becomes much more than that. But Severn Trent, that program would become ours if they left. Right now, that's their program. And the two programs, I don't know whether they mesh together or not. They should.
They should, and we should be, looking at how, those are both fluids handling environments. One's processing gray water, the other's processing, incoming gray water. And there's definitely paybacks that can come from a system like this, but I think you need to look at this strategically. And perhaps this would be a way of utilizing these folks to look at this strategically for how we handle all of our, both our wastewater as well as our water treatment systems. Because our catalogs, I'm sure we've got shared valves across the plants, as ugly as that sounds. But we certainly would have some opportunities, I would think, for better scale.
I agree. The only thing I'd comment on, we were trying to get a minimum program in for the water plant. If we add the wastewater in, we're adding a lot more labor.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying we ought to think about it.
Okay, I agree with you.
Yeah,
Wholeheartedly. Don't get me wrong.
I've seen, I hate to say it, I've seen a lot of people waste a lot of money on this.
Right.
And I've worked with big companies that wasted a lot of money on this. I just got done cleaning up a big mess at BASF, North America. I don't want to see us, weasel away, a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there when we can do a good job and come out with some peace of mind, get the uptimes on the plants up, which is what we're trying to do, and be more disciplined in terms of how we maintain our equipment, maximize its lifetime, and buy smarter.
One thing that we hope to do with our own staff inputting the data, we'll have buy-in to the system. One of the things that happens with things like this, you develop them and your staff don't use it.
Right.
And that's terrible.
Right.
So hopefully if they help build the program, they will use it.
Yeah, and then you have to integrate it with your work order system, your
Yeah.
wet system, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Sorry about that.
It's okay. No, I appreciate that. And we are hoping to starting with the water plant to get that part done and go on to the next phases if we can. I wanted to talk about the filter assessment that was part of the audit. As you recall, in the 2001 audit, there were some major modifications done to the system to make it more suitable for dealing with the upcoming regulations at that time. So there was new filter under drains and a new filter design used, and those filters are now installed. When we looked at the filters there, that are there now, one of the things we noticed was the substantial amount of taste and odor material that was associated with the filter media, either on it or contained within it. Perhaps a lot of it may be the PAC that has made it past the clarification step and into the filter and is embedded within the filter. And so when it was in contact with the water, it removed the contaminants, but after it sits in contact with the filter with more and more contaminants coming past it, it becomes saturated and then it starts releasing the contaminants. So One thing that could be happening is that there may be other triggering events for the taste and odor that are occurring in the watershed, but because this material is being retained in the filters, that this is increasing the duration of the events after the triggering event, which is one of the characteristics of the taste and odor events you've been seeing. One is the intensity of them, but the other one is the incredible duration of them. There used to be weeks and now they're months in duration, and it could be that this is a partial contributor to that. It also could be from the solids in the sedimentation basins that are not being removed, except on a manual basis.
So to just restate what you've said, we have the potential for triggering events to occur perhaps out of our settling ponds, as well as potentially even in our media.
Filter media, that's correct. They could be contributing again somehow to the events that you're seeing.
Just because of our ability to be able to capture that carbon, settle it out appropriately, and then remove it because it has to be removed as a solid.
Yes.
And just like in our swimming pools, we build stuff up in our little sand filters, and eventually you got to dump the sand filter because contaminants build up in the sand filter and it becomes less and less effective.
It's hoped that the backwashing procedures can be tweaked to help improve that, to get it out of there.
But they're not perfect.
Right. Yeah, they do eventually all, go bad. And 10, 15 years is not necessarily out of the question for a filter replacement. We were hoping they would last longer than that, but we think that there may be ways to look at to help to remediate the filter in place without having to replace them. But then that will be part of the evaluation of are these remediation measures, are they effective? If they're not, don't do it. If they cost too much, it might be less costly just to replace the media. And the other thing is how easy and what do you deal with the waste that you produce from the cleaning process. So that would be part of the evaluation, is how to deal with the filters. This again was also talked about in the watershed vulnerability assessment as a potential strategy, riverbank filtration, which is as an alternative to putting the intake into the river, you put a well next to the river. The water flows through the boundary of the river and the subsurface. It goes through in the groundwater to the well and is pulled in and then taken to the plant from there. So all the materials that are filtered out between the river and the well stay in the subsurface media, don't get into the well that goes to the water plant. So these types of facilities have been shown in many places to be very good. First of all, for turbidity removal, the particulate material stays in the river, it doesn't get into the wells. You get much, much lower particulate levels. The microorganisms that are between the well and the river degrade disinfection byproduct precursor material. They do very well with taste and odors generally. They are very effective for things like Giardia and Crypto, which are primary pathogens, which can have problems if they get into your plant, get into your filter, whereas the organisms between the well and the river can degrade those organisms, keep them from getting in the well in the first place. There's almost never any Crypto or Giardia measured in a riverbank filtration well that I know of, especially one that's operated well. It's also been...
Question on that. The well system that you're talking about would be used in addition to, or in lieu of the intake? The intake would still stay in place.
You'd have the intake available. You could bypass it and just use the riverbank well.
But that would be only like if we had something unhealthy happening in the river during a period of time, the wells would operate, or would they operate all the time?
What you're hoping is that you have enough that it would be something you want to use as much as you possibly can. You use the river when you have to, but try to use the riverbank well as much as you possibly can. You use it all the time because it reduces the amount of material that comes, the particulate material, DB precursors, everything else that comes into the treatment facility. Now you could add, what many people have done is add enough riverbank wells so that all the water they need, they can get from one or more riverbank wells. That doesn't mean you still have the existing intake into the surface water as an option, but you you can use the riverbank well to satisfy some or all of your demand that you need. And again, it also could be, if you have a system that doesn't handle all the demand, you could at least have enough water to let an event pass your surface
Right.
water intake, and with water restrictions or whatever, be able to deal with the event until it passes. So the idea is that that it has been shown to work in a variety of places. The question is it going to provide the same level of turbidity removal, DBB precursor removal, taste and odor, and other things that we've seen in other places in this particular environment? So you have to evaluate how this particular subsurface material does with those.
And in terms of, if we were to put these wells in and they were to be successful, would we still be having to use powdered active carbon downstream?
If it
Or is the
removes
potential exist to be able to shut that down?
if it removes taste and odor like it has in a lot of the other places I've seen, it would reduce them to the level that you wouldn't need the PHC to remove the taste and odor. You wouldn't have taste and odor compounds anymore.
Thank you.
So, are all of these wells, restate, if you put a well, a riverbank well in point A, how many can you put in that vicinity? And how can you project that the efficiency of well A is going to be replicated in well B and C and D and E?
Yeah, that was part of the evaluation.
Okay, so we don't know that because we don't know what the terrain is, what the water, the characteristics of the well site and all that.
Right, because I did emphasize the water quality aspects of it, but there is the water production aspect. It has to produce enough water that you can get the water that you need.
And we don't have any idea about that.
Yes, correct. And if you have more wells, then one well is going to impact the other well. So you still want to get more production, but
would be quality as well as quantity maybe too.
That's correct.
Okay, so we are just starting out on this little voyage about these well bank filtration wells.
One comment on these wells are large diameter wells with radial arms that go word, so they're not an 8-inch or 10-inch well. They're probably, 3 to 4 feet in diameter, could be, with radial arms going there, and they act as collectors from the riverbank. If you notice on the slide there, that the well has to be developed in sand and gravel. If you have rock present, it's a no-go. We know we have rock along the Dan River, so I don't know if this will be feasible or not. I certainly hope so. Also, most of the wells when they're put in, we would like to get our plants designed for 18 million gallons a day. I don't think we'll probably get 18 million gallons out of these wells. They'll probably supplement what we have, is what my idea would be of them, if they're feasible.
Good, that was my next question.
Well,
Thank you.
but then you have to question whether supplementing buys you anything.
Are they what now?
To me, supplementing, what does it buy you?
Well, it would buy-
What type of return do we get on that investment?
well, during an event in the river, it would buy us time for the event to pass, would it not?
Well,
At the
it,
very
would
least.
it takes the place, if you will, of raw water impoundments. Where you could draw off this one, you could draw off that. Plus, during high turbidity events, could not be a contamination event, but during high turbidity events, we draw through these wells, and we don't use as much chemical. Our chemical cost of treating the water is much decreased. So you'll get some return on your investment. I don't know if we'll get 18 million gallons out of these wells and not be able to abandon our surface water intakes, what I'm trying to say. But it is a lot of benefit to be gathered
But
from.
what's our current consumption right now, average?
5 to 6 million gallons a day.
So I'm not sure if we need 18 million
Right, we probably
a
don't.
day for design, if you know what I mean.
I'm just saying, I doubt if we get that much, is what it's probably not going, we may not even get 6 million, I don't know.
So these wells could be used in conjunction with, simultaneously run as you're
Yes.
getting
Yes.
the river,
And they reduce
flow of the
operating-
river.
Reduce the operating cost because it's better.
Even if it's only 25% of the total intake for any time period, it will help in every way.
That's right. Plus it'll help,
Well-
like Richard said, with THM removal things like that we just spent $800,000 putting in aeration and the mixing and ventilation equipment in that Blue Park Reservoir for THM removal.
It would still seem to me that, as Mr. Donahue pointed out, there is a cost of capital. There's the return here on this in fixed cost, which we don't know what the fixed cost is, and we don't know what the savings will be either.
Now,
Because we don't know what the capacity is, and we don't know what kind of quality we're gonna get for the water.
I have a proposal going out now on what, I wrote it a month ago, to go out soon to get
Right.
proposal. It'll actually be done in 3 phases. One's a desktop to see if
Okay.
you have the geology and so forth. Then you put in test wells to determine your capacity, and then you go to construction.
Okay,
So we're at the first step now, just to see if it's feasible.
okay. I just want to make sure that, you understood there's some skepticism here.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
Thank you.
I'm somewhat skeptical myself.
All right,
Well,
well, good.
I would think-
Always be skeptical.
I mean, it is a green alternative, and it has a lot of advantages, and I think it would probably be beneficial to bring a couple of stories in from municipalities that have implemented these type of systems. And it probably wouldn't hurt to do a little bit of a benchmark exercise to understand, after you've looked at the preliminary feasibility, get back from them some direct feedback on how things have gone.
These things have been around for about 40 years ago. I was exposed to them, and I thought they were pie in the sky. And that we were afraid of the contamination and things like
Sure.
that. They were to be used for not riverbank filtration, but for development of wells. But there's at least one location in Virginia that uses them, and there's quite a few on the Mississippi River.
Right.
And in fact, Richard and them have some background on some of that. But
Be great.
I was gonna mention too, that some of the skepticism that Barry mentioned, the other facilities that have put them in, and a lot of them have put them in as like, let's have this in our back pocket as something supplemental to use. And what ends up happening in every case I found is they end up liking them so much that they end up trying to put more and more wells in. Because again, the benefits that you get out of them because of all the turbidity that doesn't even come into your plant. It never gets in the well in the first place, and the consequent reduction in chemical doses, the among other things, simple things, the water temperature stays the same. So you're not having the water temperature go up or down. You have to modify your chemical feed. You're able, everything in a water plant works better when you can keep it under control and not have things vary a lot. So the turbidity isn't going up or down, the pH isn't going up and down, temperature. So there are lots of good things that once you have the facility in place and are using it, you might prefer to use it rather than the other more variable sources.
What is the average distance from the river to the well?
If you're in Europe, it's several hundred feet. If you're in the United States, there are several that are 10 feet, but mostly it's around 50 feet.
15.
50. But there are some that are within 10 feet, and you can see that you don't see the things in the river, in the well, that you do see in the river. Because you can do side-by-side monitoring. So they are, again, but that depends on the type of subsurface material and the river itself, for that matter. So, but there are several places where it has worked and has worked very well. And the question no one wants to talk about, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the lead issue. Again, lead is a developing problem, an issue because of the health effects of the developmental suppression that it causes, and there's more and more concern with lead in the U.S. And as it's developing, EPA is in the process of developing what's called the long-term LCR. The current rule is called the LCR, or lead and copper rule. The LT LCR is the long-term lead and copper rule. That one is in development stage right now. There's a process called the National Drinking Water Advisory Committee Act. That's a group that is compiled by EPA that includes drinking water utilities, state regulators, public interest groups, doctors, public health authorities. They get together and they talk about the developing regulation and whether it needs to be regulated, how it needs to be regulated, what will be included. That has gone through the final stages of that, and they've made a final recommendation. EPA could decide to implement that in its entirety. They could decide to do something completely different. Chances are they're going to be doing something like what they're talking about. And as that process started before Flint, it has gone progressively more aspects of it have been included. So it's not as simple as it even was when it first started. It's getting because of the developing concerns. One of the issues that keeps coming up is that in order to get the lead levels down, part of the issue with lead is that there is no safe level of lead. So if you're at 10, you need to be 5. If you're at 5, you need to be 2. It needs to be taken as low as you can possibly get it. And so the consensus that's developing is that every place that has a lead service line needs to develop plans to find those lead service lines and replace them. And that does, if replacing them just on the utility side is not considered enough. You need to get rid of all the lead, because you get just about as much lead, sometimes more lead, by replacing the utility side than you do by replacing both the utility and the customer side. So the developing trend, whether you like it or not, is that in this country there's going to be a big push to replace all lead service lines. And so the reason I'm mentioning this at this time is doesn't mean you have to do the plan today, but you need to start incorporating that into your plans about dealing with doing the inventory, finding where they are, finding out the places where you have done the replacements on the utility side, and find out what's on the customer side at those locations. Try to find any additional places in the system that might have lead service lines. And then after that, developing a plan of what you're going to do to replace those lead service lines. What kind of programs can and will you be able to do, either by funding or loans, or by just coming up with public education and ways to convince customers that it's going to be in their own best interest to replace these lead service lines, and that there will be a benefit to them. And so that may be a plan where you say, I'm going to replace 7% every year for the next 15 years, or 10% for the next 10 years. Some kind of plan, and coming up with how that's going to be funded will be a big part of the issue. And EPA is probably not going to be coming up with funding. It's going to have to be the utilities that are going to have to come up with funding, or the plan for dealing with that.
Where is there anything in writing from the EPA saying this is coming down the line? I'm not doubting that it is.
There's a final NIDWAC report, the National Drinking Water Advisory Committee Act. I can provide that to you. I don't have that right
Would
on
you
my
please?
hand, but I can provide that to you through
Right now.
Barry.
Because again, I don't doubt that it's coming, but we're tilting at windmills until we actually see what is being proposed.
Right,
If it's
and
cogitated or thought upon or something.
The proposed rule is, since the NIDWAC process has been completed, so they've gotten the recommendations from this committee, the proposed rule is coming very soon. And then, as you said, there's going to be a comment period after that of at least 18 months. It may be longer. So there is some
Right,
years
there's a
before the
NIDWAC
final
report.
rule is going to be not only approved, but then become implemented.
Does the NITWAC rule have the proposed rule? Is the proposed rule written down anywhere?
They have not published their proposed rule. The NIDWAC has made their recommendations are what the proposed rule should include.
Okay, what exactly is NITWAC's recommendation?
It goes into a variety of areas on lead service lines and other issues. There's going to be a change in how the compliance sites are required right now. You're required to take a certain percentage of lead service lines in a certain number of places that have lead solder in them now. Your tier 1 sites, they're all going to have to be lead service lines. So if you have more lead service lines in your system than the total number of compliance sites you have, they're all going to be lead service lines. So that means that people that are in compliance now, because they're including this broader spectrum of sampling locations, might be over the limit when they're using sites that only have lead. There's going to be changes in how the copper is going to be monitored.
Specifically as it relates to meter to residence, that's part of the line that's on the customer side of the meter. As it relates to utilities, Is there a proposed recommendation from NITWAC?
It is that everyone is going to have to replace the lead service line on both the utility and customer side.
And is NITWAC's recommendation that the utility be the one responsible for or the one to have to fund the replacement on the
I don't
customer
think
side?
they've addressed that. They've addressed that it needs to be done. They haven't said how, they haven't proposed a mechanism for how. That's not their job. They're saying that there needs, the recommendation from EPA needs to be that all lead service lines need to be replaced.
Thank you.
Just so you know, the report for the lead and copper rule working group was actually published August 24th, 2015, before Flint.
Thank you.
So this is not just a response to Flint. It's
It's been in the works.
cooking for a while.
The LTS, it started before that, the NIDWAC.
So that's, I guess, better news. It's not a
Okay.
knee-jerk.
Is that it for Mr.
Yeah,
Brown?
right.
Is that it for Mr. Brown?
Yes, and I think so. I had time for questions, but we kind of had those during the talks.
We tend to ask our questions as we go along here.
Yeah. So that I'm gonna
Our
prepare
short-term
comments.
memories aren't good, so we
Yeah,
just spit it out.
exactly. Well stated. Anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Brown?
No, I appreciate your time and thanks for your questions, your comments, and hopefully we've
Well,
answered your questions.
I have one comment. It was an excellent and comprehensive report, and we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item on the agenda is a spokesman from BP, and we're going to talk about natural gas and the natural gas market. Joey Caskey is going to come on up. Joey, we appreciate your patience. And we know that you believe that gas is more important than water, but we did the water first today.
I think the water is important as well.
Well, thank you for being with us.
I
Please.
recognize a lot of the faces. I don't know if you remember the last time I was here is when, probably 2 years ago after the coldest winter ever, and we talked about the polar vortex and prices got up to $40, $80. And I think I ended the little presentation with a big question mark saying, who knows what's going to happen. So there's been a lot of changes since then. And periodically I come up and talk to Jason and Becky and Alan and give them a market update. So I was up here probably a couple weeks ago, and they said it might be a good time to get in front of you guys again and give you that update. So when we start, or we present, we have to put the disclaimer out there, and essentially you don't have to read all this, but what it's saying is, if I screw up today, it's on me and not BP, so that's where we are on that. One of the slides I wanted to put in here today was just kind of show you guys what we do comprehensively for our customers. A lot of people see the BP name and the first thing they think about is gasoline or the oil major, which obviously we are those. And I won't read all these to you, but as you go around, I mean, we got 16 wind farms. We just opened a wholesale power marketing group up in Sanford, Connecticut. We've got 16 regional offices across the United States. I manage the one in Charlotte. Actually, I live in Gastonia, North Carolina, but nobody in Houston knew where Gastonia was, so we're the Charlotte office to them. And then I manage the activities for the Carolinas, Virginia, West Virginia, and Southern Maryland. And I've been working with Danville for probably over 20 years now. A couple other things on here, and we'll talk about a little bit in a little bit, but we recently opened an office in Mexico. There's a lot of gas coming from the United States into Mexico, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then I think we put in there, we were the first oil and gas company to register as a Dodd-Frank swap dealer, which that was a lot of work. So like I said earlier, we had a lot of changes over, I'll just put all that up there. We had a lot of changes over the last 5 years. In 2010, the NYMEX market was essentially $4 and some change, 15 cents, 16 cents. MMBTU, and as far as acronym, that is just the unit that we measure natural gas in. 6 years later, in June, that same contract closed out for June at a little bit under $2. I didn't put July up here, and we'll talk about this as well in an upcoming slide, but July actually closed out 70 cents higher than June, which is kind of significant, and I'll go through that. A couple other things to note through here. You can see the Mexican exports predicted in 2010 there was going to be a little bit under 1 billion cubic feet. Now there's 3 times that predicted in going to Mexico right now, so that's good. If you look right under there, the LNG 2010, we were looking at LNG imports, and that was estimated, you can read, at 4 BCF by 2020. Now we're actually set up and currently are exporting gas out of the United States, so that's pretty significant.
Translate and bottom line it for me.
I'm sorry?
If you had to summarize, what are the significant changes over the last 5 years? Just
The biggest
more natural gas that's cheaper, more profits for
natural
BP,
gas is
less?
cheaper. The biggest change has happened is horizontal drilling. Usually they used to poke the hole straight down in the ground. I'm sorry.
We're filming this, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. So usually they used to poke the hole straight down in the ground. They could drill one hole. Now with horizontal drilling, they actually go down in the ground and they spider web out, and it actually has fingers out there so they can cover a lot more area. With that, they got more efficiency with the drilling, and that's where the market in the Marcellus Shale, and I'll show you a slide on that in a minute, it flooded the market, and that's why the prices started coming down.
So natural gas is cheaper now than it was in 2010.
Yes. And, some of this due to the weather as well. We had the coldest winter ever in 2014. And this past winter was probably one of the warmest winters ever. Overall, there was some cold days, but overall. And so that keeps prices depressed. So we put this chart in here, and this kind of shows, you can look at the natural gas, and it's in the black. And you can go back as far as 2007, 2008. You can see the spikes there when natural gas was up to $15, $16, $17 a unit. And then as we get closer, and like we just alluded to, all the products are converging to the natural gas. There's not a big spread with oil and natural gas like they have been. And there was even months when natural gas was lower than coal. Now this is where we started getting into it a little bit. Historically, the gas came out of the Gulf of Mexico, as you know, and it went up Transcontinental Pipeline, which is what you guys are served off of. And you remember, if there was a storm in the Gulf or anything like that, prices would spike. If you look up in there at the top, the Pennsylvania area, we're talking about the shale gas. That's where a lot of the horizontal drilling was going on. And there's several different shale formations there, but Marcellus is by far the biggest. So one thing that's really helping you and others off Transco is that we actually got gas coming historically from the Gulf like we had in the past, but you've also got gas and projects being built, taking gas out of the Marcellus Shale and other shales and coming down the Transcontinental Pipeline. So it's kind of hard to visualize, but you've got gas pushing up from the Gulf and gas pushing down in the same pipeline. So it's a bi-directional pipe. That's a new phenomenon that's going on. So that's really helped prices and the supply there. The biggest thing, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, here's some of the those in there. These are the gas flows, and historically, if you look at 2016, you can see the gas going to the northeast. You see gas coming down from the south down to the Gulf. As you go out, 2017, it starts ramping up. Projection in 2018 in the green, it really ramps up. essentially what they're banking on is that they build the infrastructure away from the Marcellus Shale to bring that gas back into our marketplace. So those are some of the unknowns. Are they going to get the infrastructure built in the time frame that they say they are? So that could slow down bringing this gas to the market, and you could see prices start going back up a little bit. So that's one of the messages today. A couple of things, if you look on this chart, we got a lot of the growth is in the power sector. You can see it up in the Maryland area around the Coke Point, and there's Carolinas experience a lot of that. And if you look down, the industrial growth is down in the Texas, Louisiana sector. A lot of that is around the chemical plants, and there's a lot of LNG and Mexico export coming out of Texas.
The LNG's coming from Mexico?
No, they're exporting out of Texas into other places.
Right.
Right. Mostly what's going to Mexico right now is gas coming out of Texas, just the gas that you guys receive up in Transco. And I'll show you a map of their infrastructure in a minute. So another thing that happened 5 years ago, when we found the Marcellus, and you guys realized that there was a lot of drilling going on, interest rates were low, people were getting leveraged, they were putting a lot of emphasis on drilling new wells. As prices went down, they had all this money tied up in the wells, and prices went down. They're not making that money back. So what you saw was less and less drilling going on, and you even saw some of the wells getting capped off.
Okay. Rock on.
The next slide talks about the producer form. These are the guys that were drilling the wells and working in the Marcellus Shale. A lot of these guys actually went bankrupt. They couldn't cash flow. They weren't making enough money. So the thing to watch going forward is, and the general consensus is, there's going to be other ones. And you can see some names on here that aren't mom and pop shops. There's bigger companies there. So if this happens, that'll affect prices as well, because there'll be less gas coming out of the Marcellus. When I talked about the rig count going down, this next slide to watch, historically, you could look at, on a weekly basis, EIA, which is the energy industry, would send out how many rigs are getting built, how many new rigs are getting built on a weekly basis. And you can see where those were up in the 500, 600 range in 2010-11. You can see it's greatly dropped off in the last several years. With the drop off in the rigs, you would think that the production would be less. But like I just talked about the horizontal drilling, with all the efficiencies, you can see Haynesville is a shale play. We talked about Marcellus. And Utica is probably one of the newest shale plays out. They're still producing a lot of gas. You can see in the red there how much less they're doing with the rigs there. And there's a lot of predictions out there that there'll be a slowdown in the growth, and a lot of people are pointing back to if you see some of these the producer market take it on the chin, and some of these other guys go bankrupt and out of business, that there'll be less drilling. So a lot of folks are leaning towards that there'll be a slow in the growth of the supply going forward. The biggest question is, if you see here on this chart in the gray, this is the range of outlooks on the demand or the gas coming out of the ground. The bad thing is you got the gas trapped up here in the Northeast. You want to get it to the markets in the South and down to Texas and Florida, and even out west right now, gas is going there as well. So these are projections on, will those build outs and the infrastructure be in place to take those that gas to the markets. And the expectations for overall gas growth, I mean, these vary a lot. But a lot of it hinges on, will we still continue to see some growth in the industrial market? Or the Mexico exports, LNG exports, and the power market. I think I got a slide in here. Talking about generation capacity. If you look at there, you guys would probably be more interested in the white and also the yellow, which is PJM, and the white is SERC. As you look at the generation, if you look at the 0 point right here, you can see anything below the 0 is what's coming offline. And you can see a lot of the coal retirements there and the displacements in the coal. And you can also see the nuclear, especially in the PJM area for our area as well. And then gas in the red there is actually going up. And then obviously you see some renewable energy on there as well above the line. So that's something to watch going forward.
Can I take you back just a moment?
Yeah.
You were talking about the transportation problems. Is there going to be dislocation of price between the West Coast and the East Coast, between New England and the Gulf?
It is more.
Are you going to have multiple pricing?
Yes. Well, there's a couple things. Pricing to move the gas on you look at it as two things. You got the gas in the Gulf or up in the Northeast.
Right.
That's one piece. That's your NYMEX price, and that's all correlated with the whole United States, right?
That's the commodity.
Yes.
The second part is.
The second part is, they say it's like a train moving that wherever. That's more regionalized. So if there's constraints in certain areas, you could see those specific areas prices being higher than other areas. So it's very important that these build-outs happen and they get the gas into the areas that they're looking for.
So if you have the commodity demand in a certain part of the country, they're going to equal out the price. The demand is going to get reflected in the transportation costs.
That's correct.
Okay. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This slide here talks about the industrial growth. I mentioned it a little bit in Texas and that area, and it also talks about the strength of the U.S. dollar, which is helping that as well as far as the growth. This is our Mexican export slide of Mexico. Probably in 2012. This infrastructure, or most of this infrastructure wasn't in place. Mexico was going to put all their eggs in a basket on small-scale LNG exports. So they were thinking they could export LNG into Mexico cheaper than natural gas. And then they started looking up, hey, natural gas is just right above us. Prices have dropped down to this level. It doesn't make sense for us to do the LNG small-scale LNG export, so they shut that down, and the government owns all this infrastructure here. So they put this in pretty fast. This infrastructure came in pretty fast. So that's one thing to watch is how much gas gets sent there, and they're still building out that system as well. We added these charts for you guys. I thought they'd be interesting to you. It's talking about the Virginia power sector market and the demand year over year. You could tell that you guys, and a lot of it could be the weather driven, but also maybe the economy and the industrial, a lot of the industrial growth coming back as well. But you can see in the black there, you guys, 2016 are way ahead of years past. And we put this chart in here to kind of show you the breakdown. I thought that would be interesting to you. You can see that a lot of your power is going to the power plants in the red, and that's getting bigger. It looks like your residential has gone up some, but your industrial's kind of staying pretty much flat. And on the back end there in 16, I saw that ramp up a little bit, and your commercial in blue is staying flat. We talked about LNG exports, and that's a unique dynamic that's going on right now. If you look at the red, that's the Japan index. Mr. Smith, when we were talking about the NYMEX price across the United States, that would be the HH, which is the Henry Hub. So that would be our index, and then the Japan, and the other one would be Europe. So you can see there was a big spread between taking gas to Japan and where we're actually purchasing gas. Of course, you had to get it ready and export it there with liquefaction. But now that the prices have come together and converged, it's cheaper for them to get some LNG brought to them closer to their country rather than us sending it to them. So here's the long-term Henry Hub spot price outlook. We look at a lot of different external folks and kind of put those together in a range. So you can see the dotted line was a year ago, and right now where the black line is, underneath there, 2015 going forward, that's where prices are currently trading. And the range of outlooks, if you can see, everything's above the black line where it's currently trading. So that's telling me that there's so much unknown in the market that a lot of folks are thinking that NYMEX price is going to go back up. And this last piece I put in here was regional pricing. It's what we talked about when we said about the train moving the gas over. The one you would need to really look at is Transco Zone 4 and Zone 5. You're actually served off of Transco Zone 5. So you can see in the summer times, the value for that transportation piece is very minimal. It's around a couple pennies. The peak months, Dec, Jan, and Feb, you can see that's still probably worth $3.50 a decatherm, which is huge. But I think once these projects come into play, you could see those winter months kind of come down as well and follow the summer. And just give you an order of magnitude, the summer historically over the 25 years I've been doing this has always been anywhere from 25 cents to 40 cents. And the winter's been 80 cents to $1.50. This was all before we got into the shale gas and all that. So that's where we are on that. And I think we kind of touched on all this right now, but what we're waiting for, the premise is that the market works, that the supply and demand will equal out, and that will take care of the pricing. Right now, obviously the producers don't like what they can get for their gas, so they want prices to go up. We as consumers want the prices to stay where they are, so that there'll be a tug of war there. And that's it.
Let me ask you a question about
Okay.
the difference between LNG and dry gas.
And what?
LNG and dry gas.
Okay. Okay.
So LNG is being used is that being used to make electric power with? LNG.
They'll take that LNG. The places that are importing the LNG, they don't have the infrastructure we have, so they will regas it and actually use it in most cases the same way we do in a regular natural gas.
So what we're doing in this country is we're liquefying the gas so it'll ship.
It'll ship, that's correct.
And then they're taking the liquid out, and then they're using it for what we would use it for.
Exactly, because they don't have the infrastructure, or that they could be in a location they can actually get the natural gas that we have.
So the pricing is very close.
Right now it is. Historically, there was a spread there.
And the spread was in the favor of which kind?
The spread would be in the favor of us exporting the gas to another country. And you're talking spreads of $8, $10, $12 a decathermal unit that we use to measure. Now the spreads are a couple dollars, so it doesn't even really make sense to re-gasify that and send it.
Okay. So what's the spread on LNG versus dry gas on a whatever BTU basis?
I have to go back to that slide. It's pretty close.
Has it always been close?
No.
No.
It's probably $2.50, $3 right now. I mean, it fluctuates obviously with the market, but I would say $2 to $4 spread.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions?
What is the capped off capacity in the Marcellus Shale right now? You didn't really talk about that. I understand
How much?
the capped off capacity up in the Marcellus Shale fields right now.
How much is it? Yeah, I should have touched on that. So, a couple things are going on there. I don't know the exact volume that's capped off there. What's happening is those wells are sitting there, and historically it would take months to get a well up and going. They think they could get those wells, if prices get to a good place and they wanted to get the gas back out of there, they could get that out in a matter of weeks. But another dynamic that's going on, some of these smaller producers are hurting for money. So they might have two wells sitting here and another well functioning. If a part gets broke on this well, they're going over here borrowing from these wells.
Right.
So who knows what conditions those wells are going to be when they go back. So there's a lot of unknowns.
But that's really just talking about short versus medium-term timing to get these things up and running.
Right.
Back to the question, I don't think you answered it. What's the estimate of what's capped off and
The
not in
volume.
production today? Yes.
I don't have that off the top of my head. I'll get that to
I
you.
would think that's important. I
Yeah.
mean, because when I look at this spread here that you've got on that, you know, the optimism that this price is going up, this little graph here that you showed us.
Right. I'll get that to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that would be interesting just to kind of, because
Okay.
I mean, I've heard that it's very large, 30 to 40%, but that's just speculation.
I would say it was in that area or maybe even more.
Really?
I didn't want to throw a number out there, but
Yeah, if you could send it to us, that would be
I will.
interesting.
I'll do that.
And that's just the Marcellus?
It's probably, Marcellus is the largest, but it's probably
Okay.
all the shale gas in aggregate.
The Transco Appalachian connector that you were talking about earlier that was in one of the pictures there.
There's a couple projects going on.
Is that the one that hadn't been started yet? Is that the Mountain Pipeline, or is that
Yes.
the one we've been hearing about?
You've been hearing about that one. You've been hearing, there's two other
Right.
Transco larger projects going on, which is the Atlantic Sunrise,
Right.
which is slated to come on, initially was slated to come on January 2017, but given all the stuff we just talked about with some of the delays, they're thinking maybe third or fourth quarter of 17 now.
Okay.
So that's.
Is that the VEPCO pipeline for,
No, that actually is taking gas directly out of Marcellus, and there's an interconnect called the Leidy line that comes over to Transco and back down through, we can bring it back down to Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina.
oh, okay. So
And
it's
or
that,
it could go north.
okay, so it's that soon?
Yes,
The
and that's
time-
about that's probably 1.7 million decatherms a day, which is pretty significant. To give you an order of magnitude, the city here, on a peak day, you probably burn, just off your FT, or firm transport, you probably burn 17,000 a day. So that gives you an order of magnitude of how big that is.
Is Transco going to have access to Utica Field too?
The Utica. I don't know. I'm sure at some point they'll try to build a lateral over there. I think they're so focused. They had those two major projects. The other project came on December 2016, which is the Leidy project, they call it, because of the Leidy line, obviously. It was about half of what, or a little bit under a half of what the new project, the big Atlantic Sunrise is coming on.
So Darren's going to be in good shape to have access to those fields.
Once they build that infrastructure in place, there should be plenty of gas. Now, the other tangibles that come into play is how much gas are we gonna export? How much gas is going to Mexico? That type of thing.
To affect the price.
It could affect the price, yes.
Who, is FERC regulating that in any way? I mean, is anybody looking after the interest of the homeland, trying to keep the prices down versus shipping it all out, keeping the prices up?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I would hope. I would hope.
Is FERC watching that? Is anybody?
Yeah, FERC watches the pipeline and the construction. I don't think they regulate how much gas goes in and out of the country, or it's free market. So I don't think that's regulated. But obviously, I think us as consumers.
Well, you look at all those LNG plants that are being built, none of which were on the books 6 or 7 years ago. They were import terminals.
You're exactly
if they were
right.
anything.
The one that was on the picture, or the slide there, up in Cove Point, I'll give you a little background. We started with BP 10 years ago. I managed a small company in North South Carolina. We sold to industrials. BP actually brought us on because we'd be a natural outlet to their Cove Point capacity. We're a third owner of Cove Point. So they were going to serve or be an outlet to their LNG. They're actually, we never got 1 decatherm of LNG coming out of that plant.
Wow.
I mean, it just changes so fast, and there's so many variables going on, dynamic.
Anybody else?
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Caskey. We appreciate your information.
A lot of moving parts.
Well, we're now going to move on to communications. City Manager, Mr. Larkin, do you have anything for us today?
Sure. I'd like to commend our Utilities Department, our Power and Light Division, for being able to respond to some storms over the past month and able to get people back on their power as quickly as they could. But one of the concerns that we've heard is that our customers are not getting a good estimated time of restoration on their power. So I wanted to provide you all with an update for the benefit of the Utility Commission as well as for the anybody watching. We're looking at, we're going to implement some processes that will get information out to customers as soon as possible, immediately. So we're already going to start doing that, but also we've got in the pipeline plans to implement a utility portal, which will be a system that people could, on their phone, report outages, also get information about where there are outages, and then receive information about how quickly we believe those outages will be repaired. Unfortunately, that system won't be in place until the end of this year, likely because we're waiting on a software upgrade for our customer information system. So that should be implemented in August, and then there'll be some time to get the other systems up and running, but we're looking at December, hopefully at the best case scenario, for the utility portal system to be up in place. We also want to have a better IVR, which is an interactive voice system for when people call in to report an outage, that they'll get better information through that system. So we're going to be trying to get that in place also after the CIS upgrade is done. So these are things that we have that we're working on right now, hopefully so that our customers can get better information when there are outages, that they will be able to provide us with information and know that when they call in that we've received the information and understand that they have an outage. It's unfortunate that I know there was some frustration about the outages and the length of time it took for some of those outages to be restored, and the lack of information about how long it would take. But we heard those concerns, and we're looking at ways to improve it immediately, but in the long term, make some really good improvements that will be helpful to the customer in the long term.
Well, I know everybody really appreciate that, and I know there was quite a flurry there for a few days of just outages here and there, and hard to track down and takes a while to get them fixed. But we appreciate y'all's efforts. Utility staff, Ms. Evans?
Yeah, just to dovetail on what Mr. Larkin was saying, the CIS upgrade is scheduled to go online on August the 22nd. And certainly the information, the customer information from CIS feeds into the IVR and the other portals, so it's important that we get that piece in so that we can move forward with the other projects. But it's still on track, and as of today, we're looking to August 22nd for a go-live date.
We keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Dunkley? Mr. Wiles? Yes, sir. Ms. Holly? All right. Commission members, please begin, Mr. Donahue.
Nothing further?
I'd just like to say thank you to the staff that was here and to the presenters for the useful information that was provided today. And I'll also follow up with Ken in saying I think that the Danville Power and Light did a wonderful job of getting the power restored. And as he said earlier, there are mechanisms that are being worked on to make communication more efficient and more timely, and I look forward to that. But thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McLaughlin?
I just want to say I'm happy to be serving the citizens in this capacity. It's a lot of information to retain. I appreciate touring the city and the plants, meeting the different directors, and I look forward to learning a lot. And if anyone knows me and followed my campaign, I'm all about transparency and the citizen. So I'm appreciative that the Utilities Commission has tried their best to do what is necessary to keep costs and make sure that the system is running smoothly and efficiently. So I'm looking forward to working with everyone.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Not anything today, thank you.
Mr. Nicholas?
Where are we on the integration of our payment systems for people who want to pay at the Charles Financial Center? Going to one person who can tell you what your balance is, and then you can pay with a credit card right there instead of having to go into two different people. The thing we talked about 4 months ago. Where are we on making progress on that issue?
What I have planned to do is to look at the customer service experience in all areas at the Charles Harris Center, and to see, to examine what we're doing in a lot of areas and make improvements to everything that would include that, among other things. And that's something that I've asked our finance director and our utilities director to make goals for the upcoming year.
So we're nowhere. It's still the same experience.
It's still the same right now, but there's a lot to. We have to do some changes to the way things are. I can go into more detail with you on that after this if you'd like.
Okay.
There's processes and systems in place that have to be kept separate at this point, and maybe Carolyn can explain it better than I can. But
Well, in an effort not to tie up the payment lines with customers that don't have information about their bill, and part of the problem is there are a lot of customers who come into the service center to pay their bills that don't actually have them there. So in order to try to keep the line moving for payment, the cashiers do not have access to CIS, which is the customer information that would give them the breakdown of the balances. So in order to see the breakdown of the balances that the customers want, so they know exactly what they have to pay for a particular cycle, then they have to see the clerks who do have access to CIS.
So why then can't the clerks take payment? Why not have a credit card machine right there at their desk, or let them take a check? You can make it a no cash line or something. I mean, it seems to me that we are grossly inefficient by having people wait in one line to find out how much they owe and then have to get into another line to actually pay it. From a customer service perspective, most customer service agencies, we name them, you go up there and, if I want to return something after it's been given to me over Christmas, I go to one desk at Target and I can return everything and they do it all right there for me. I mean, why can't we just go and meet with the clerk, they tell them their balance, okay, here's my credit card, or okay, here's my check. Why do I have to then go and stand in another line and double the length of my trip there?
I don't know that they have looked at, I'm sure it would be an issue with security. A lot of the customers that we're dealing with are not cash customers. I don't know that they have thought that process through as far as allowing them to take checks. But we're not at a place that we can take point of sale credit card payments.
Okay. For a customer that has their bill, that walks in and just goes to the cashier, why can't we take credit cards? Why can't the cashiers take credit cards, or can they? There's a time they could, now they can't. Can they again?
Well, the only credit card company that we could take point of sale payments for was Discover. The others would not even put a machine. The volume was not such that they would put a machine in the lobby for point of sale transactions. And that's where we are now.
Okay. And you might have covered this, but where are we on eliminating the fee for paying with a credit card online?
That is contingent on the upgrade as well, the CIS upgrade that I talked about earlier. That has to be put in place so that the information in that system can translate to another system, Paymentus, which takes our credit card payments and makes sure that everything is up to date. Right now, without the upgrade, you'd have to send information on a daily basis. Once the upgrades are in place, everything will be more seamless. And so as soon as that's in place, we'll be able to start doing more.
Your timeline was December?
December, yes, and maybe January, but December at the best case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Our last person to participate is the director. Do you have a director's report from Mr. Gray today?
Not today.
Not today, all right.
Mr. Smith, not to delay the.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry. Let me recognize the city attorney, please.
You had asked me, you had asked me to just try to get a status on the litigation that is going on currently between AMP and Bechtel. And I've been on the phone a couple of times with John Benteen, who is the AMP General Counsel. Right now, the litigation is continuing. As you all may or may not recall, the Supreme Court of Ohio indicated that they would take the appeal of the summary judgment that occurred in the District Court, Federal Court of Ohio. The Ohio Supreme Court said they, in fact, would take up the issue. They wrote a nice opinion saying, we have changed our minds and we are not going to address the issue. So right now, an appeal has been filed to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Ohio to determine whether or not they will allow the appeal to go forward. If the appeal goes forward, then obviously litigation continues. If it does not, then the only potential recovery that AMP would have would be a $1.5 million recovery for breach of contract against Bechtel. At this point, there are $3.4 million in stranded costs for the AMP-GS project, but it has been pointed out to me that that is mainly for the project itself. Since the litigation has essentially moved from the district court on into the appeal level, the AMP has picked up the tab for all of that. They have continued to pay for that. Also, one of the interesting things that I found out is originally we subscribed to 75 megawatts. We stepped up to 25. All of those jurisdictions that stepped up by another 25 AMP is carrying those costs now. So we are still only on the hook for the 75. We currently pay about $96,000 a month towards those stranded costs, so those things are coming down pretty quickly. As far as the $3 million that we currently have, I think probably with the information we have and some updates that will occur in the next 30 days, it would be prudent to have Mr. Larkin, Mr. Gray, and Mr. Atkins get together to determine exactly whether or not we could use that $3 million for another purpose, or we would want to just continually pay off those stranded costs. So,
Thank you very much. Mr. Disher, you sit way back in the back. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Just a quick follow-up.
Well, you could please come up. You need to come up here anyway, because we want to thank you for the hard work that your guys did in the last 2 weeks, since the last time we met.
Well, I appreciate
'Cause
that.
I
Thank the
know-
team as well. And
Yeah.
just wanted to follow up with Ken had stated earlier, a lot of storms, a lot of outages, but we also want to share thanks to the city of Martinsville, our Pike contractors and our Elliott contractors that helped us as well, because with them, it helped supplement our restoration crew efforts to help get the lights on sooner also. Because of the mutual aid agreement we have with the other municipalities, we took advantage of that with the city of Martinsville, and that helped us out as well. So, and thanks to all the public on their patience, because just want to let you know we're working as fast and as expeditiously as we can, but we want to make sure we're being safe as well. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much. If no one has anything else, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.